Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is April 6th. On this day in 1997, a tragic event unfolded in Greene County, Tennessee, and it was one that left a community in mourning and raised unsettling questions about youth violence. Today, we're going to dive into the senseless murders of the Lillelid family by a group of 6 teenagers. Let's get started. Vidar Lillelid's story began far from Tennessee in the scenic city of Bergen, Norway. In 1985, seeking his fresh start, he made the bold move and decided to come to the United States. Just a few years later, in 1989, his life changed again when he married Delfina Zelaya, a first-generation Honduran American from New York City. The two were brought together not only by love, but also by a shared devotion to their faith as Jehovah's Witnesses. The couple eventually made their home in Knoxville, Tennessee. Vidar found work as a bellhop at a local hotel, while Delfina focused on raising their 2 children, 6-year-old Tabitha and 2-year-old Peter. Friends and neighbors knew the family as kind, gentle, and deeply committed to their faith. They were regulars at their congregation and always showed up with warm smiles and a welcoming spirit. The group responsible for the Lillilid family's tragic deaths wasn't a gang of hardened criminals, but rather 6 teenagers from Pikeville, Kentucky, a small Appalachian town where poverty, hardship, and limited opportunities were just part of daily life. Each of them came from turbulent backgrounds, and many experienced mental health struggles and brushes with the law. What they all had in common, though, was a desire to escape. That shared feeling of entrapment and longing for something different ultimately bound them together in a way that would lead to unthinkable tragedy. Natasha Cornett was 18 and was often seen as the unofficial leader. Raised in deep poverty, Natasha faced significant mental health challenges from an early age, including depression and bipolar disorder. She gravitated toward a Gothic subculture, embracing dark fashion and alternative spiritual beliefs, which only deepened her sense of alienation. In the years leading up to the crime, Natasha dropped out of school, briefly got married, and was clearly searching for connection, something that she thought she had found with this group of friends. At only 14, Jason Bryant was the youngest of the group. But despite his age, he had already racked up a troubling juvenile record by the time he became involved. Growing up in a difficult home environment, Jason was known for being volatile and impulsive. He idolized older members of the group, and his eagerness to fit in made him highly impressionable. Karen Howell was 17. She was quiet, artistic, and emotionally fragile. She came from a home that was full of conflict and abuse at the hands of her stepfather. Karen found solace in her friendship with Natasha and was drawn in by their shared fascination with the goth subculture. She later said that the group's planned trip to New Orleans seemed like a chance for a fresh start and was just a way to get away from their painful upbringing. Joseph Risner was the only non-teenager, having just turned 20. In many ways, he acted as a surrogate older brother in the group. A heavy drinker with a history of petty crimes and drug use, Joseph wasn't seen as violent, but was undeniably influential. He was also one of the few with a driver's license, which made him an essential part of the group's plan to leave Kentucky behind. Like the others, 18-year-old Crystal Sturgill came from a life shaped by poverty and dysfunction. Though she wasn't known for violent behavior, her loyalty to the group, especially to Natasha and Joseph, kept her involved. Many would later describe her as a passive participant, but she was present for every step of the unfolding tragedy. Dean Mullins, 19, was perhaps the quietest of them all. Lacking a serious criminal record, Dean was seen as more of a follower than a leader. Yet, when the group crossed paths with the Lillilids, his presence made him just as culpable in what happened next. What these 6 young people shared was a sense of alienation and a desperate hope that running away could somehow lead them to a better life. They dreamed of reaching New Orleans, a place they imagined as a city of freedom and escape. But their journey was unraveling fast. Risner's unreliable car kept breaking down, they were broke, and they had no real plan beyond just leaving Kentucky. Stealing a car became part of the conversation, and when they encountered the Lillelid family at a rest stop, what might have just started as a spontaneous robbery turned into something far darker. April 6, 1997 started as just another Sunday for the Lillelid family. Vidar and Delphina, along with their children, 6-year-old Tabitha and 2-year-old Peter, were on their way to Knoxville after attending a Jehovah's Witness convention in Johnson City. During the drives, they decided to make a quick stop at a rest area off of I-81 in Greene County, Tennessee. What they couldn't have known is that this innocent stop would mark the beginning of their final moments together. At the rest area, Vidar, ever the warm, welcoming person, noticed 2 teenagers, Natasha Cornett and Karen Howell, sitting nearby. In keeping with his faith's teachings and his natural inclination to connect with others, he struck up a conversation about religion. Delphina stayed with Tabitha and Peter, likely unaware of how quickly things were about to spiral. Before long, the rest of the group, Joseph Risner, Jason Bryant, Dean Mullins, and Crystal Sturgill, joined Cornett and Howell. According to court records, this is when things took a dark turn. The group, already frustrated and desperate from their failed plans to get to New Orleans, saw the Lillilid's van as their way out. Their own car was on its last legs, and they decided almost on the spot that they would take the van by force. In an instant, the situation escalated. Jason Bryant, armed with a .25 caliber handgun, and Joseph Risner, carrying a 9mm pistol, confronted Vidar. The family was forced by gunpoint into their own Dodge Caravan, and the attackers climbed in with them. Inside the van, Vidar and Delphina tried desperately to reason with them. They offered money, credit cards, even the vehicle itself, anything if it meant sparing their lives and the lives of their children. But rather than take the van and go, the group drove the family to a remote, deserted gravel road known as Payne Hollow Lane, hidden deep in the Tennessee woods. The family was ordered out of the van and lined up beside a shallow ditch. What happened next was brutal. The group opened fire. Vidar, Delphina, and Tabitha were killed. Little Peter, though critically wounded, somehow survived. Later, forensic evidence revealed that multiple members of the group fired weapons, but Jason Bryant was responsible for most of the gunfire. The 6 fled in the van, leaving behind their broken-down car and, far worse, leaving behind the shattered family that they had just attacked. The violence was as senseless as it was devastating. There was no connection between the Lillilids and their killers, and the family's only mistake was crossing paths with a group of desperate young people whose frustrations and poor choices led to tragedy. The investigation into the murders kicked off almost immediately after a passerby made the horrifying discovery on Payne Hollow Lane early in the morning of April 7th. First responders arrived to a devastating scene. Vidar, Delphina, and Tabitha were dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Incredibly, 2-year-old Peter was still clinging to life. He was rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound behind his ear, another to his back, and injuries so severe that he would eventually lose his right eye and face permanent neurological damage. What investigators found at the scene was chaotic, but offered critical clues. Spent shell casings from both a .25 caliber and a 9mm handgun were scattered around, immediately confirming the use of two different firearms. But perhaps the biggest break came when officers spotted an abandoned Chevrolet Citation nearby, the car the 6 suspects had driven from Kentucky. Bulletins were set out across state lines, and the FBI and U.S. Border Patrol got involved, especially with the looming possibility that the suspects might try to slip into Mexico. And that fear turned out to be spot on. Less than 2 days after the murders, Mexican authorities stopped the group as they tried to cross the border at the Lukeville-Sonoita port of entry in Arizona. Mexican officials detained them on the spot and soon handed them over to U.S. authorities without any resistance. Back in Tennessee, the 6 were quickly charged with crimes connected to the murders. Investigators were building a solid case. Forensic evidence was everywhere. Matching shell casings, bullet trajectories, and fingerprints left no doubt. Even more telling, when the van was recovered, it was filled with the Lillelid family's belongings. Their personal items, their clothing, and even their religious materials. One figure loomed particularly large: Jason Bryant. Just 14 years old at the time, Bryant was found to have fired most of the fatal shots, a fact that was confirmed by ballistic tests. His youth and volatile behavior became central to understanding how what might have started as a robbery spiraled into a massacre. This murder trial quickly became one of the most emotionally charged and closely followed court cases Tennessee had seen in years. The sheer brutality of the crimes, combined with the youth of the perpetrators and the innocence of the victims, drew national attention. All 6 defendants, Natasha, Jason, Karen, Joseph, Crystal, and Dean, were charged with a litany of serious offenses. 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and aggravated kidnapping. The prosecution didn't hold back. They initially sought the death penalty for all 6, even for those who were under 18 at the time. What complicated the legal process, though, was the varying involvement among the defendants. But prosecutors leaned heavily on Tennessee's criminal responsibility statute, arguing that it didn't matter who fired the most shots. All 6 acted together with a shared intent to commit kidnapping and robbery, and those felony acts directly led to murder. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the 6 made a pivotal choice. In March 1998, they all entered guilty pleas. Each pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder. While this move took the death penalty off the table, it sealed their fate in another way. The sentencing was harsh, but to many, it was fitting. Each of the defendants received 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. 1 for each family member who lost their life, plus an additional 25 years for the attempted murder of Peter. The sentences guaranteed that every one of them would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. In the years that followed, the case continued to make headlines as appeals and post-conviction petitions were filed. The defendants raised concerns about everything from ineffective legal representation to claims that their pleas were made under pressure. Others pointed to the youth of several defendants, particularly Jason Bryant, and argued that life without parole for somebody that young was extreme. Despite these efforts, Tennessee courts consistently upheld the original convictions and sentences. The Lillelid case became a touchstone in debates about juvenile justice and plea bargains in capital cases. Should teenagers, some barely out of childhood, be condemned to die in prison? Or did the heinous nature of the crime outweigh their youth? Today, all 6 defendants remain incarcerated in Tennessee correctional facilities, serving out their life sentences. For Peter, the tragedy that claimed the lives of his parents and sister left him as the sole survivor, just 2 years old at the time. His recovery was nothing short of miraculous, but it was also filled with challenges. The gunshot wounds he sustained left lasting physical impairments, including the loss of an eye and permanent neurological damage. Following a difficult custody battle between family members, Peter was placed under the care of his paternal aunt in Sweden. Far from the place that his life was changed forever, he was raised surrounded by family who did everything they could to help him heal, both physically and emotionally. Over the years, Peter grew up with the scars of that night, not just the physical ones, but the invisible ones too. But as of 2022, Peter was living happily in Connecticut with his wife, Caitlin. Decades later, the Lillelid family is remembered not just for the tragedy that befell them, but for the kindness, faith, and compassion that they represented. And Peter's survival continues to serve as a symbol, not of what was lost, but of what was endured. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!